Before the world praised her, they made her apologize for existing. Amaka stepped off the rutted bus just beyond the village edge, her suitcase trailing dust, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the red earth path. She had arrived in Lagos years ago with trembling ambition and the bright promise of ability. Yet what the city offered was not glory, but a name tag ripped from her chest amid laughter. She didn't join. The memory of the uniform she entered wearing, the polished marble of the Adeyemi mansion's lobby, and the sting of contempt in the eyes of the rich man in the charcoal-tailored suit lingered in her mind like a wound. She did not arrive in pride, but hope, and they knocked it out quietly. Years later, the same woman returned, quiet, poised, yet powerful in a way that needed no announcement. She walked onto the slick granite driveway under glass walls that reflected city lights, her reflection stretched and righteous. The golden badge pinned to her lapel read Amaka Okoro, founder and visionary, its letters etched in silver light, and under it, an unspoken truth. She was no longer the girl who carried a uniform of silence. She wore dignity like a cloak. She wore transformation like a whisper that became a roar. In the beginning, she bore humiliation without bitterness. The night she left Lagos, they hurled jokes about her accent, about her low-rank badge, about her being just a maid. The name tag they tore from her chest, the fabric curling in the wind, became a symbol of worth they denied. She felt shame not at the laughter, but at her own tremor when she walked away. Then she chose to cultivate steel in place of tears. She returned to the soil of her village, planted the broken pieces of her self-worth in cracked earth, watered them with late-night study sessions, early morning teaching, and the knowledge that no one else's shame could define her truth. In that village where the mango trees whispered resilience and the school desks bent under the weight of dreams, Amaka taught girls who believed their names meant nothing. She gave them white chalk and lined notebooks and whispered, "Your name is not the tag they gave you. Your soul is the badge they can't erase." Her days passed in the warmth of rural breezes, her uniform long swapped for dresses in muted earth tones, her hair tied gently, her eyes steady with promise. She became the silent architect of possibility, without banners, without spotlight, without loud declarations. Meanwhile, in Lagos, the Adeyemi empire pulsed with surface triumph. New high-rises, press releases, boardroom laughter. The man in the charcoal suit remained at its center, Chijioke Adeyemi, walking corridors of mirror glass, towering over the city's skyline. He believed names and status were given, not earned. He believed materials built legacies. People merely decorated them. He never noticed the ones holding the elevators. He never paused when the name tab made stood in his shadow. When Amaka returned to Lagos, she entered not as a beggar for respect, but as a bearer of truth. Her footsteps crossing the mansion's threshold were not loud, but they were weighty. The marble beneath her felt familiar and unfamiliar. Once the ground of rejection, now the surface of transformation. She stood in the glass-walled lobby, the chandelier above catching the badge's light, illuminating not her ambition, but her integrity. Staff glanced briefly and looked away. Guests regarded her like a piece of decor. Yet something changed in their glances, a questioning of assumptions, a disturbance in their comfort. She approached the red-carpeted gala. Cameras flashed. Guests paused. The host smiled politely. She did not bow. Instead, she looked out over the assembly of polished suits and designer gowns and spoke into the microphone. "I once answered to a name I didn't choose," she announced, her voice calm yet firm. "I carried a badge I didn't belong to. I learned that when your name is ripped from your chest, you have a choice: hide forever or wear it louder." The hush that followed felt sacred. She lifted her badge, held it aloft for all to see. "I chose the latter." The applause that followed was delayed, but genuine. Among the crowd, the man in the charcoal suit sat rigid, his smile gone, his world realigning. In that moment, the mansion crackled with truth. The name tag once torn had been reborn. The woman once dismissed was now visible. The marble floors didn't shout, they witnessed. And then the invitation arrived. It came sealed in heavy ivory paper, embossed with the company seal of the Adeyemi Group. The words inside were brief, yet blunted like a hammer. "Your insight is requested. The Adeyemi Group requests your leadership in its name restoration project. She held the envelope beneath the mansion's dripping canopy. Rain had begun to fall, each drop carving rivulets into polished stone. In the reflection at her feet, she saw the badge's glint and a name tag like the one once torn, floating in the puddle's surface, then sinking. She bent down, touched the water, picked up the tag. The engraved letters shimmered. Amaka Okoro. The badge in her suit, the tag in her hand, a full circle of dignity. She looked up at the sprawling facade of the mansion, lights still shimmering in the rain. A part of her wondered, will they remember how they spell my name once? Her voice hushed. One day, they'll regret spelling my name wrong. The words were not threat. They were prophecy. She walked through the gates. The rain slowed. The electric lights flickered as though in alignment. In the reflection of the glass, she saw the figure behind her, Chijioke, framed by a window, watching. His expression shifted from arrogance to recognition. But she did not turn. She did not wait. Her path lay forward. As the mansion doors closed behind her, the rain turned into a downpour, and a black car pulled up. The driver opened the door. The letter seal bore the same logo that once humiliated her. Her heart skipped. The journey she fled began again, but this time, she drove. They stripped her of dignity, not knowing they were forging steel. Amaka's first morning in Lagos had begun with a promise of transformation, a journey from village dust and silent years to marble floors and bright futures. But as the sun rose that day over the glass towers, the promise unraveled. She stood in the mirrored lobby of the Adeyemi mansion, uniform crisp, name tag pinned, Amaka Okoro, house associate. She carried hope like a small flame against the chilly air of privilege. A man in the charcoal suit passed by, glanced at her name tag, then looked away as though it bore the weight of his irritation. He didn't know her. He didn't care. To him, she was neither worker nor dreamer, just invisible. The elites of Lagos watched with curious eyes when Amaka served the breakfast gala, the silver trays, the guests in tailored suits, the laughter that rolled like expensive thunder. She navigated the crowd with trained precision, pouring juice, refilling glasses, folding napkins. But each smile she offered bounced off the cold glass walls like an echo with no source. She smiled less as the hours passed, noticing the way a woman in diamonds looked down at her uniform, noticing the way a guest leaned over and whispered, "Precious accent. Doesn't belong here." Noticing the way her own hands trembled ever so slightly when the chandelier above caught a stray drop of her sweat and made it glitter like a pearl, an accidental gem in the wrong setting. And then the scandal. It began with a glass of red wine tipped too quickly, a stain spreading over the white linen tablecloth, and a guest's gasp. The eyes turned to Amaka. She felt the heat in her cheeks before the words formed. She spilled it. She must have been careless. The crowd paused. Murmurs enlarged. Her stomach dropped. The man in the charcoal suit, Chijioke, stepped forward. He raised his voice so the entire hall heard. How dare she attend such an event without proper training? She insults our name. His face glowed with amusement. Hers tightened with shame. The managers arrived. They removed her apron, unpinned her tag, stripped the cloth from her chest before many of the guests had left. The tag fell to the floor and lay beside the spilled wine, as though dignity and disaster collided in the same puddle. "You're dismissed," they said. Amaka stood very still, the polished floor reflecting her silhouette, thin and trembling. She could not speak. She could not cry, because they had taken away not just her role, but her identity. They didn't just break her career, they broke her voice. She walked out of the mansion under the hovering gaze of security cameras and silent, but judgmental guests. The night air was heavy. The city lights blurred like stars dissolving. She found a taxi, the engine humming like pity, and returned to the village. She wore the same uniform with 2 long scratches from the tag's removal, physical scars on cloth. Back in the bus, she watched Lagos recede. Towers, glass, salted hearts. She carried her suitcase, her dreams damp, her pride battered but not dissolved. The village came closer as the bus rattled over cracked roads. She felt the red earth welcoming yet accusatory, as though it had recorded her departure and indexed her shame. In the village, the faces that once greeted her now glanced away. She came back. They whispered. After the rich house, after the name tag torn. The winds of gossip rustled the mango trees. Her mother's house smelled the same. Cassava, green leaves, evening fires. But Amaka felt foreign in it. Between tears and acceptance, she found herself invisible again. She planted seedlings in the dawn, washed the floor of the small house, told no one what she felt. And every night she pressed her palm against the rough red wall and whispered, "One day they'll regret spelling my name wrong." She carried that vow quietly. Years passed. In the village, fields yielded, but recognition did not. The authorities came, teachers came, but the city's applause did not follow. Yet inside Amaka, a seed germinated. The humiliation she bore turned into a slow burn. Not rage, but purpose. She taught the village girls under the neem tree, gave chalk to fingers that trembled with timidity, offered words to voices that trembled with shame. She became unseen strength. She found solace and dignity reclaimed, not loud, not proud, but steadfast. Meanwhile, in Lagos, Chijio climbed higher. His reflection in glass only grew larger. His empire expanded. Higher floors, new lines of credit. The name Adeyemi hovered over the city like a halo of gold. His mind did not return to the girl he dismissed. He assumed she vanished. He assumed she would forget. He assumed wrong. But somewhere, quietly, the soil of the village held her. Somewhere her scarred uniform hung drying in the sun. Somewhere the record of a stolen badge lay in memory. And now, as headlines began to whisper, Adeyemi Group under investigation, name scandal in Lagos elite, the world that had judged Amaka began to tremble. In the same building where her tag was torn lay cracks unseen. The mirrors that once reflected Chijio's power now reflected fear. The trophies atop his shelves waited for dust. As a messenger entered the mansion of Adeyemi, handing an envelope marked urgent, Chijio's confident smile faltered. Outside his window, the city lights flickered, and a single sentence trembled through his mind. The same family empire that destroyed her is now collapsing. And somewhere beyond those glass walls, Amaka stood in the dusk, her eyes clear, the name tag in her hand glinting, ready. In exile, she planted what the city tried to kill. Amaka arrived in the village before dawn, her suitcase left by the roadside, her heart still bearing the weight of Lagos glass towers and mocking laughter. The red earth path welcomed her with familiarity, yet every step felt foreign after the hush of the mansion's corridors. She passed the mango grove where she once played, the cassava fields where she once labored, and inhaled the scent of soil warmed by sunrise, a smell of beginnings. The city had stripped her of uniform and name tag, had dismissed her dreams as dust. But the village did not expect her return. It did not press her for explanations. It simply watched, distant and still. In that quiet she planted herself. She rented a small classroom with peeling paint and rusted ceiling fan, shaded by the big neem tree that stood sentinel through decades of drought. There, she gathered young girls whose mothers worked away, whose fathers never believed they needed schooling, whose voices trembled when asked to state their names. Amaka stood before them in a plain, earth-toned dress, hair tied back, skin warm in the golden morning light. Her uniform had changed, but not her purpose. She laid down jugs of water, cleaned chalkboards, placed stacks of lined notebooks. The girls stared at her, unsure of what to expect. She smiled and said, "Your name is not the tag they gave you. Your soul is the badge they cannot rip off." The words resonated like seeds dropped into dry soil. Each morning she waded into fields behind her small house, once fallow, once neglected, and began the physical labor she had rejected in Lagos. With calloused fingers she dug trenches, planted morina seedlings, watered cassava shoots. She tuned her mind to rhythms of growth, the soil's resistance, the sprout's first tremor, the slow sun-driven lift of green leaves. In the evenings, she returned to the classroom and taught lessons. Arithmetic on a chalk dustboard, reading lessons under the neem tree's shade, stories of women whose names once meant nothing and now meant everything. The harshness of village life, the drought, the mocking glances, the rust on metal roofs, only sharpened her resolve. She was reclaiming what the city had tried to kill: dignity, voice, belonging. Some days, the villagers whispered. The Lagos girl returned. She's trying too hard. Their eyes measured her effort with skepticism. She carried no trophy. She bore no title. She simply worked. She cleaned floors in her old house, swept the yard, prepared cassava dough for lunch. She told no one about the name tag ripped off in Lagos, the gala, the mansion. Instead, she let silence carry the weight of the past. The dryness of the field became her canvas. Where once the soil cracked, she planted rows of green leaf shoots. The first time a bean plant broke through crusted earth beneath her fingers, she didn't cheer. She paused, pressed her hand to the stem, whispered, "You did well." And in that moment the field answered with rustle and promise. Inside the classroom, the girls began to lean forward. Neka asked questions. Blessing raised her hand. Their accents shifted from quiet tremors to clear tones. Amaka watched them stand straighter. She felt something stir. The village children who once waited for help now raised their own hands. In that classroom under the neem tree, she was not the maid who returned. She was the guide who stayed. The school's benches were patched, books donated, faded posters of ambition decorating the walls. The sunlight filtered through wide windows, dust motes dancing like silent applause. Yet the wilderness of rebuilding carried scars. The summer drought came with a vengeance. The soil cracked like porcelain, seedlings wilted, sweat glistened on Amaka's brow. The girls returned with empty jugs. Their uniforms faded. The council quietly suggested she go back to the city. Let Lagos teach you after all. They said nothing more. She stood tall. She walked to the dry field, pulled cracked seedlings, replanted new ones, and designed a water harvest channel leading from the roof of the classroom to the garden. She carried buckets at dawn. She repaired the roof herself. At night she sat in the dark, charting years of lessons and planting charts. She did not complain. Silence became her tool. The dry field began to bloom under her hands. It took time, but when the first green shoots rose, villagers paused and took note. Meanwhile, back in Lagos, the gleaming towers of the Adeyemi Empire still reached skyward. Power dinners, boardroom deals, the reflection of success in polished glass. Chijioke never thought of the village school. He never considered the woman in the earth-brown dress teaching girls. He believed the name tag he gave others defined them. He believed power had no roots. But growth had already begun beyond his sight. One afternoon, dust and gravel under bare feet, Amaka led her girls beyond the classroom into the garden where tomatoes and okra grew in small raised beds. She asked them to harvest, to count, and to draw. The sun dipped low, turning the seedlings golden. She spoke. "You are like the roots of these plants, invisible below. But without you, the leaves above would fall." A boy from the village came and watched, fluorescent notebook in hand. The girls offered him mangoes. Laughter echoed. The field no longer felt empty. It hummed with life. In the back corner of her schoolyard, the patch that had once been cracked clay now glowed green under the setting sun. Amaka knelt, pulled out a wilted sprout, wrapped her fingers around its stem, and held it upward towards the sky. There was no applause. Only wind. Only low hum of insects. Only the certainty of growth. And then the day arrived. A black car rumbled up the red earth path. Village children froze in their games. Amaka squinted against the dust. The door opened and stepped out a government official wearing a crisp suit, tie loosened, carrying a folder embossed with a seal. He greeted the students, walked past the garden, paused at the raised beds. He watched the girls harvesting tomatoes, the notebooks open, the chalkboard full of diagrams. He turned to Amaka. His eyes widened. He asked questions about curriculum. He asked about startup capital. He asked, "How did you fund this?" She paused. "By planting hope and selling seedlings," she replied. He opened his folder, typed on his tablet, nodded slowly. He returned to Lagos. The black car disappeared behind green trees. But the seed of recognition had grown. In the next days, the government official wrote a memo. The Adeyemi family name, still powerful in Lagos, stood unchallenged. Yet now her wilderness had a bridge to the city. As the official's car vanished, the girls stood under the neem tree waving. One held a handwritten sign. "Next year, Adeyemi Group Collaboration." In the field that once lay barren, the first shoots of something larger broke the soil, and somewhere in Lagos, a boardroom shivered. The people who buried her now needed her to rescue their name. When the black envelope arrived, Amaka was halfway through preparing the classroom for tomorrow's lesson. Chalkboard cleaned, desks aligned, seedlings watered. She heard the tap at the door, opened it, and found a courier holding the seal of the Adeyemi group. Her heart paused. The name that once ripped off her badge now reached out with urgency. She withheld no visible reaction. She simply closed the door behind him and carried the envelope to her desk beneath the neem tree. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, dappled light falling across the embossed logo. In that moment, the stillness of the village field collided with the shimmering halls of Lagos. The world she built here grew roots, yet the world she left beckoned. It was not a recall, it was a demand. Inside the stationery of the envelope, she found a letter printed on heavy paper. Dear Ms. Amaka Okoro, your insight is requested. The Adeyemi group regrets recent events that have brought disrepute upon the family name and requires your strategic counsel. Your leadership is valued. Please board flight A462 to Lagos on April 12th at 9:30 a.m. She breathed in the words as though they carried the scent of redemption and of trap. For the family that once stripped her of uniform and voice was now asking for help. The irony was sharp, the promise of power even sharper. She sat still in the quiet garden, seedlings rustling behind her, and asked, would I ever help them? The scandal had grown louder in Lagos. News outlets flashed images of boardrooms emptied, glass doors locked, the Adeyemi logo smeared by headlines. Financial fraud, name under investigation, empire cracks. The family that once threw her away now needed her to rebuild the fortress they never knew she could build from dust. Amaka closed her laptop and walked through rows of green plants, fingers lightly touching leaves, her mind wrestling with this first real test. The roots she nurtured here were real. The village believed in her. The girls trusted her. But the city offered the stage she once feared. The question hovered between blossoms and skyscrapers. Should she help those who broke her? Or walk away into the quiet she now commanded? In the kitchen she rested for a moment, the hammer of her decision ringing louder than the cicadas. Mornings passed in routine, collecting water, repairing desks, marking assignments, but nothing quiet. Inside the room where she once taught children to lift their voices, she repeated the emotional line softly. Revenge is easy. Restoration is divine. The words settled like dew. She considered her old badge, tucked in a wooden box in her study, the gold engraving shimmering. She thought of how easily she could walk away now, and how easily she could use this moment to reclaim everything. But she paused, refusing to choose haste. Later that day, she traveled to the village's edge where the dusty road met the tar highway. She boarded the bus that would take her to the small town and connect her to Lagos. The sun set low, casting long shadows over cassava fields. In her lap, the envelope lay unopened. Around her, girls stared out the window, dreams in their eyes. She thought of the promises she made to them. She thought of the field that had begun to bloom under her hands. She thought of the man in the charcoal suit who once told her she didn't belong. The journey ahead felt like crossing a bridge she had once burnt. That night, she slept on a thin mattress in her simple quarters, the ceiling fan humming, far removed from chandeliers and applause. Before she drifted, she whispered into darkness, if I step through that door tomorrow, will I be a savior or a servant again? The night answered only with silence. Morning arrived in Lagos with cold light. The city throbbed with ambition and regret both. She emerged at the airport, badge shining in the harsh corridor light. The flight board flickered. A462 Lagos, 9:30 a.m. Around her walked suited men and tailored women. She wore the dress of the village, modest, purpose-driven, steady. People glanced, but she held their gaze. In that moment, she recrossed her own threshold. The maid's uniform long gone, yet the history it carried still registered in her bones. At the corporate headquarters of the Adeyemi Group, the lobby was pristine, marble, glass, mirrors reflecting her image back at her twice. She walked through the security gates, a nod to the guard, and paused just inside the main entrance. The glass doors whispered shut behind her, separating what had been from what could be. The name on her badge glinted, Amaka Okoro. She inhaled a breath of power shot through memories. Upstairs, a boardroom awaited. Chijioke Adeyemi stood at the head, his posture perfect, his face polite but brittle. He offered her a seat. She sat quietly. The members around him shifted. Their eyes looked at her uniform badge, then up to her face. They heard her story. The scandal had damaged them. Now they sat in damage control mode. She realized the dynamic. They were wounded, and she was the doctor placed on a pedestal, yet they had ignored her when she healed without video cameras. They presented spreadsheets, audits showing losses, PR strategies, brand repair blueprints. But Amaka did not immediately speak. Instead, she closed her eyes for a moment, recalled the field of green shoots in her village, the girls reciting their names aloud, the notebook that trembled on a student's desk as she raised her hand. She opened her eyes and said softly, "The first thing you must rebuild is the story you told yourself." The room waited. Then she added, "If you think I'm here to bow to you, you are wrong. I am here because your name is less valuable than your purpose." The room's air shifted. Questions came. "Will you work for us? What's your fee? Do you know our operations?" Amaka listened. She understood that this was more than consulting. It was a test of character. For her, helping them now did not mean erasing the past, but forging a new chapter where she did not remain invisible. She spoke, "I'm willing to help. But if I help you, you must help those who help me. Those girls, that field, that village. And you must remember, dignity is not a tag. It's a practice." The board exchanged glances. Chijioke's jaw clenched. He didn't say it aloud, but the question was there. Can I trust the one I dismissed? In that moment, she felt the weight of her own journey. She could demand what she deserved, or extend what the world had denied her. She could exact revenge by letting them perish without her, or she could restore not only them, but herself. The moral test stood before her like a bridge between wilted ambition and rising purpose. The meeting ended. She stood in the corridor again, badge shining, shoes quiet on polished floor. Outside the window, she saw her reflection. Still the girl who taught under the neem tree. Still the one who planted seedlings in cracked earth. Still the woman who had survived humiliation. She thought of the others, the girls waiting, the roots beneath ground, the vines reaching skyward. Helping those who broke her would not restore her name. It would transform it. She left the building with the envelope of contract in her hand, walked through the lobby, past the trophy hall, past the photograph of the patriarch staring down. The doors opened to rain on the pavement. She stepped into the car, badge glinting. On the ride home, she watched the city pass, with its lights, its glass, its reflections of success. But she saw something else. Cracks in the glass, dark lines rimming the brilliance. And then she thought, will they remember to spell my name right this time? The journey ahead was uncertain. As she boarded the flight scheduled for tomorrow morning, she looked out the window at the city lights fading behind. The pilot's voice chimed, "Welcome aboard flight A462 to Lagos." She fastened the seatbelt and watched the runway lights turn into ribbons. The city of the past awaited, and with it, the moment she would decide. Will she help the family who destroyed her, or walk away from them forever? Forgiveness is not forgetfulness, but it unlocks new doors. Forgiveness had never been Amaka's weakness. It was her quiet weapon. She had learned that forgiving was not about forgetting, but about unlocking new doors that others had nailed shut. When she returned to Lagos, the air did not feel heavier. It felt expectant. The city had not softened, but she had become unbreakable. She was no longer the girl who once bowed beneath chandeliers. She was the woman who now walked beneath them without blinking. Lagos, with its arrogance and glass, finally had to look up to meet her eyes. The car doors opened before the Adeyemi Group's headquarters, a temple of mirrors and ambition. Its silver facade reflected the clouds, but not its cracks. The same building that had once watched her humiliation now watched her rebirth. Her heels struck the marble like declarations. Her badge, Amaka Okoro, strategic advisor, caught the light, each engraved letter a defiance carved from pain. Staff turned to look, uncertain if they should greet or bow. She didn't demand either. Respect, she believed, should not be begged. It should be remembered. Inside, the air conditioning carried the faint hum of whispers. The corridors smelled of perfume and politics. She passed by the portraits of past Adeyemis, men who smiled with borrowed pride, and wondered if any of them had ever built something with their hands. Now she was the one summoned to restore their collapsing name. A strange, poetic symmetry. And then, in the lounge overlooking the skyline, she saw him, Dr. Keen Nwosu, the one man who, years ago, had treated her as human when everyone else saw her as background noise. Back then, he had been the strategist behind Adeyemi Group's rise. Now, he was the consultant called to contain its fall. He looked up, disbelief softening into recognition. "Amaka," he said, his tone thick with memory. "So the stories were true." Amaka smiled faintly. "I didn't come back for stories, sir. I came to fix what arrogance broke." Keen studied her face, the steadiness of her eyes, the calm behind her fire. "You've changed," he said finally. "Not changed," she corrected. Unlearned fear. Their handshake sealed more than reunion. It sealed purpose. And as they walked through the corridors together, a small flame of trust reignited between them. He introduced her to the department heads, one by one. Some offered rehearsed smiles. Others looked at her badge longer than necessary. The whispers followed her into elevators, into conference rooms, into the corners where old power hid behind protocol. Still, she spoke with grace, never haste. She studied documents late into the night, mapping the company's rot like a surgeon tracing a scar. She didn't expose anyone. She exposed systems. Every recommendation she made was a mirror, forcing people to look at themselves. In her first board meeting, an executive scoffed. "You speak as if you built this place." She looked up slowly. "No," she said, her tone even. "I'm speaking because I helped clean it once. I know its foundation better than anyone here." The room went still. Even Keen stopped breathing for a moment. Then, without raising her voice, she continued outlining her recovery plan, each sentence a thread weaving dignity back into a fabric once torn. Days passed, and her quiet authority began to unsettle the hierarchy. Secretaries greeted her before greeting their managers. Drivers nodded with hidden pride when she entered. The janitorial staff whispered her name like a legend. "She talks to us," one said. "She listens." Everywhere she went, Amaka restored what had been lost belief. Not just in the company, but in themselves. She didn't need applause. She needed alignment. One afternoon, Keen invited her to the executive garden terrace. The city glowed below them in fractured sunlight. He handed her a glass of Zobo and said, "You've done more in 2 weeks than they did in 2 years. But power never forgets who once bowed before it." Amaka's lips curved faintly. "Then let it remember. I no longer kneel." That night, the air in Lagos thickened with rain. She received a message, "Tomorrow, Heritage Site Review. Adeyemi Mansion." The same mansion where she had once been unmade. The next day, she arrived alone. The mansion had been polished into a museum of legacy. Portraits lined the walls. Chandeliers glittered above like rehearsed apologies. She walked through the corridors with measured steps, the echoes of her past footsteps following behind. Every tile remembered, every shadow whispered. And then, he appeared. Chijioke Adeyemi, the man in the charcoal suit, the one who had torn her name from her chest, as if it were paper. He was older now, his temples lined with the arrogance of years, his gait still dripping with control. He walked around the corner, phone pressed to his ear, lips curving into a smile reserved for men who believe they own the world. Their eyes met. For a moment, time held its breath. Then nothing. No recognition. No spark of memory. He looked through her, not at her. A polite nod. A faint smile. And then, he moved past her as though she were air. Amaka stood still. Her heart did not race. Her hands did not tremble. The girl who once cried in this hall was gone. The woman who remained had no need to be remembered. Her badge glinted in the filtered light. The silence was thick, almost sacred. She turned slightly, her voice a whisper meant for no one but the past itself. Even shadows remember the light that cast them. And as Chijioke's footsteps faded down the marble corridor, Amaka walked the opposite way, toward the open doors, the rain, and the future waiting beyond. She had crossed paths with the man who destroyed her, and he didn't even remember her face. But now, he would have to remember her name. She rose in the same halls where they once whispered her name in shame. The corridors that once swallowed her voice now carried the echo of her footsteps like applause. Amaka moved through the Adeyemi Group's headquarters with a presence that could not be borrowed. It had to be earned. The same halls where her name was once whispered in corners, in mockery, now held quiet deference. Her strategies were not just working. They were reshaping the company's spine. Meetings started on time. Communication moved down as well as up. For the first time in years, staff spoke without fear of being discarded. Her presence unsettled the old guard but ignited the forgotten. She didn't sell ideas in boardrooms. She told stories. Stories of overlooked markets, of local vendors choked by bureaucracy, of women who were funding businesses with nothing but memory and borrowed faith. She wasn't reinventing the company. She was reminding it of its humanity. The shift began when she proposed the Roots to Rise campaign, an initiative to spotlight women entrepreneurs from underserved communities who had built something out of nothing. Let the Adeyemi name sponsor those who've done more with less, she said. At first, the board hesitated. Some worried it would expose too much contrast between legacy wealth and street-born hustle. But Keene backed her. He told them, brand redemption isn't about hiding flaws. It's about celebrating those who overcame them. The first event was held in a public square, not a ballroom. Women from the mainland markets, from rural cooperatives, from urban textiles, all gathered under a tent with Adeyemi banners in the background. Amaka stood center stage, her voice steady as she introduced them one by one, each with a story that mirrored her own in pieces. The media showed up. Cameras flashed. But the power was in the voices amplified, not the logos displayed. One woman, Mama KG, a widow-turned-soap maker, hugged Amaka tightly and said in her ear, "I saw you speak and told my daughter she is our eyes. You haven't forgotten us." Amaka blinked back tears. She hadn't. And now, the world was watching as she brought others into the light she had once been denied. Back at headquarters, shifts were seismic. Younger staff started staying longer, not out of obligation, but inspiration. Middle managers adapted. An HR assistant designed an in-house mentorship program for entry-level women. Amaka approved it with a note. Let them rise before they beg. Even Chijioke noticed. Subtle at first. He'd begun watching her longer in meetings. He'd interrupt less when she spoke. During one strategy review, she corrected a misquoted statistic, and he paused, looked at her fully for the first time, not with threat, but with the discomfort of recognition. "You've done your homework," he said, flipping a page. "I live the footnotes," she replied without flinching. Later that week, he arrived unannounced at the Roots to Rise roundtable. No cameras, no grand entrance. He simply stood at the back, listening as Amaka moderated a panel with poise and fire. As she walked off stage, their eyes met. His gaze didn't carry malice. It carried curiosity, like a man searching for a memory buried in time. "Your voice," he said quietly, "feels familiar." Amaka nodded, brushing past him with a half-smile. Truth often does. But every rise invites resistance. A week later, a journalist from a prominent Lagos blog requested an interview. Not with Amaka the advisor, but with Amaka the former maid. He had traced her name through quiet whispers, old employee records, even a forgotten gala photo. The email read, "The world deserves to know how far you've come. Don't you agree?" King called her into his office. "This is either the crown or the cross," he said, laying the printed article draft before her. "It's beautifully written, but it exposes everything." The story described her dismissal, the wine scandal, her silent departure from the mansion. It didn't mock her. It framed her as a phoenix. But it named names, dates, wounds. Amaka stared at the draft for a long time. The rise had begun. But now, the world might trace the scars beneath the crown. Would revealing her past shame her again, or cement her power forever? The past always knocks louder when the future begins to open. It began with a headline, "From Maid to Mastermind: The Hidden History of Adeyemi Group's Rising Star." The article went live at 6:47 a.m. By 7:10, the executive WhatsApp group was flooded with panicked links. By 8 o'clock, the boardroom was in full emergency mode. Her name trended, not for the campaigns she'd led or the transformations she'd sparked, but for the shame they thought she buried. The past hadn't knocked. It had kicked the door in. The article was crafted with elegance, but its elegance was poison. It framed her journey as a secret rise, a story of cunning endurance. It painted the Adeyemi Group not as a company in revival, but as one manipulated by a woman who once cleaned its corridors. Her story was now viral not because she triumphed, but because she had dared to triumph here. Among them, the backlash was immediate. She hid her identity, said one board member. She used her position to rewrite history, another added. We trusted her. Was it all a performance? By noon, the same people who praised her vision now questioned her motives. Her badge still hung from her chest, but it felt heavier than ever. In the hallway outside the crisis meeting, someone muttered, "She played us." The words cut deeper than any dismissal. They didn't just question her ideas, they questioned her integrity. Chijioke did not speak in that first meeting. He sat at the head of the table, unreadable. When he finally did speak, his voice was quieter than expected. Did you ever intend to tell us? Amaka's reply came after a pause. I wasn't hiding. I was healing. But silence followed. In rooms built on pride, vulnerability feels like betrayal. They stripped her role without ceremony. There was no shouting, no confrontation, just a collective withdrawal of warmth. Keen tried to speak on her behalf, but was silenced. You vouched for her, someone snapped. That was your mistake. Rumors multiplied. That she engineered the campaign to redeem herself, not the company. That she courted public sympathy to gain internal power. That every meeting, every improvement, every word was calculated vengeance. One executive whispered to another. She returned for revenge, not restoration. And in that moment, the bridge she had built, stone by stone, collapsed beneath her feet. By dusk, she cleared her desk. The receptionist who once smiled now averted her eyes. The intern who wrote her thank you note was nowhere to be found. Keen stood in the lobby as she left, fury in his posture. They never deserved you, he said. They didn't have to, she replied. I didn't return for them. The Adeyemi Tower loomed behind her as the car pulled away. A monument to memory, a mausoleum of trust. The news spread quickly. Social media dissected her story. Some praised her strength. Others mocked her past. Hashtags rose, fell, divided. But what remained was silence from Amaka. She did not explain. She did not defend. She did not appear. She returned to the village. The mango trees still rustled the same. The red earth still remembered her footsteps. But this time, she carried no shame, only quiet. She walked the path to her classroom. The girls had seen the headlines. They said nothing, but surrounded her, as if afraid the world would take her again. Amaka sat beneath the neem tree and opened her notebook. She began to write. Not a press release, not a statement. Just a lesson. On dignity. Back in Lagos, something strange happened. In her absence, the city did not relax. It grew unsettled. A janitor refused to take instructions from a new supervisor. She used to listen, he said. A group of interns placed flowers outside her old office. A graffiti appeared near the tower's rear gate. Real power doesn't erase its scars. Even Chijioke felt it. In every meeting that week, her absence echoed louder than her presence ever had. He reread the article alone in his office. He stared at a photo in the piece. Amaka in uniform, holding a silver tray. And beneath it, her current photo, badge shining. He closed the file, but the images didn't leave. In the quiet village, Amaka said nothing. But the silence shook Lagos harder than any speech ever could. When they silenced her again, she wrote louder with her absence. What no scandal could silence, absence did. In the days following Amaka's departure, the Adeyemi Group tried to recover as if her existence had been a side note, not the story. They removed her campaign logos, scrapped the mentorship programs, distanced themselves from the Roots to Rise initiative she birthed. Boardroom talks turned defensive. HR issued a statement on internal misrepresentation. PR spun a story of structural oversight. But structure cannot think. It cannot feel. And now it can no longer breathe. What began as minor slippages, missed emails, unclear reports, stalled projects, soon snowballed into larger tremors. Key clients quietly withdrew. Partners delayed renewals. The media, once enchanted by the redemption arc, began to circle like vultures. Headlines read, was Adeyemi's rising star a warning they ignored? Keen resigned. He didn't wait for applause. He simply walked out one morning, left his resignation letter on Chijioke's desk, and exited through the same doors Amaka had used. Only his carried regret. Chijioke, for the first time in his reign, felt unmoored. He spent long nights alone in the tower, his calls unanswered, his team scattered. The corridors no longer whispered triumph. They echoed blame. One night, unable to sleep, he returned to his office and opened a drawer he hadn't touched since the scandal. Inside were her memos, notes she had written, suggestions she had offered, quietly, persistently. He began to read. One memo suggested reallocating resources to grassroots supply chains. They had ignored it. Another outlined a local school partnership to build brand trust. They laughed at it. Another warned of a brewing internal HR issue. They denied it existed. Now, all of it had come pass. Page after page, Chijioke read the handwriting he once dismissed. Not with red ink, not with titles, but with lived experience. The final line of one note read, "We do not rise by pushing shadows down. We rise by turning on the light." He sat back in his chair, closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, let the silence speak louder than his ego. She walked away, he whispered to no one, when she could have watched us burn. Meanwhile, far from the towers and press releases, in the soft dusk of the village, Amaka walked among the neem trees. Her voice rarely raised, but her influence grew. A group of young girls organized a weekend food drive after class. A former student applied for a government scholarship. A father who once forbade his daughter from attending Amaka's school now stood quietly outside the fence, watching her teach with hands folded behind his back. She had no titles here, but she had truth. And in that truth, she rebuilt. Not brands, not towers, but belief. She turned down all media requests. She deleted the journalist's number. She refused the editorials that wanted her face on their covers. When asked why she stayed silent, she said only, "I'm not a story. I'm a seed." And seeds, she believed, spoke only in seasons. Then came the day Lagos held its breath. The National Honors Committee announced its annual list of merit nominees, recognizing exceptional public service, innovation, and nation-building impact. The names flashed across television screens. Ministers, CEOs, philanthropists. And then, Amaka Okoro, nominee, National Award for Integrity in Leadership and Societal Impact. Newsrooms paused. Anchors stumbled on her name. Social media exploded. Within minutes, reporters flooded the village. Cameras chased shadows near the neem tree. But Amaka remained unseen, unreachable, untouched. Chijioke watched the announcement from his office. Alone. He turned the volume down and stared at the screen. And for the first time in his life, he smiled. Not from pride, not from envy, but from understanding. The award ceremony was in 10 days. No one knew if Amaka would attend. But one thing was certain. Her silence had already spoken louder than 1,000 speeches. Only truth can humble pride without breaking the soul. The glass walls of the Adeyemi Tower no longer gleamed with triumph. They stood dulled by guilt. Inside, power no longer walked in heels and polished suits. It paced. It fumbled. It waited for redemption. But redemption does not knock until truth prepares the door. On a morning wrapped in gray clouds, Chijioke received a call he had not expected. "Keen Nwosu." "I'm coming in," Keen said, voice steady. "You resigned." "I did. But you're still blind. And she's not the one who needs clarity. You are." Chijioke hung up and waited in silence. Minutes later, Keen entered the office not like a visitor, but like someone returning to bury ghosts. He didn't sit. He dropped a manila folder on the glass desk. Worn, thick, heavy with things left unsaid. "What is this?" Chijioke asked. Keen's eyes narrowed. "The story behind the badge you helped tear. Before she became your scapegoat, she was your salvation." Inside the folder were printed reports, handwritten notes, anonymous staff testimonials, old budget plans, all written, funded, and executed by Amaka before her promotion. Many initiatives now being credited to the board had begun in the silence of her village office. She was mentoring young girls on company time. She was creating rural partnerships before she had a title. She gave her stipend to fund that classroom garden. "Do you know what she said to me once?" Keen's voice cracked. She said, "I'd rather lose again than win like them." Chijioke didn't speak. His fingers trembled as he turned each page. You destroyed her twice, Keen said, more gently now, and she still chose not to burn you. Flashbacks began to rise, like smoke from a past Chijioke had buried. He remembered that gala, the red wine incident. He remembered her face, not just the fear, but the restraint. She hadn't defended herself. She hadn't begged. She had walked away, and he had watched, unaware that he had silenced someone with more vision than his entire boardroom combined. She wore that shame so you could keep your shine, Keen said. And still she returned. Not to get even, but to help. You thought her return was a storm. It was a rescue. Chijioke turned to the window. His breath was shallow. She never once mentioned you in anger, Keen continued. Never. She said, some people mistake power for purpose. I came to remind them what both look like when they live in the same room. The truth cracked him open. Chijioke lowered his head, hands covering his face. The room blurred. He had feared her, mocked her, silenced her, and when she rose with grace, he had still refused to see. She walked away, Chijioke whispered, and we told the world she ran. He nodded, but she didn't run. She carried the weight you dropped. That evening, Chijioke did something no press release could fix. He shut down his meetings. He canceled the investor call, and without informing the board, he drove himself out of Lagos, away from glass towers and air-conditioned pride, into the heart of the village he had once thought beneath him. The red road stretched like memory. The trees whispered judgment and welcome all at once. He passed the mango groves, the school children, the neem tree at the edge of the learning compound. He saw the garden, thriving, the benches, the chalkboard, and there, under soft dusk light, stood Amaka. No podium, no applause, just purpose. She turned when she heard his steps. Her eyes did not flinch. For the first time, he bowed, not out of guilt but reverence. I came, he said, his voice thick, not just with an apology, but with an offer. Amaka stared at him in silence. Not in anger, not in pride, but in choice. Would she open the door again? This time, she returned not as a guest, but as a mirror to their conscience. Amaka didn't say yes immediately. She listened. She watched Chijioke's posture. She measured not the words in his mouth, but the silence between his breaths. She had learned that redemption was not a plea. It was a practice, and practice required proof. So she gave conditions, not as threats, but as declarations of alignment. If I return, she said, it won't be to fix your name. It'll be to invest in the names you ignored, the ones buried beneath marble floors and mirrored glass. I want full transparency, an independent audit committee, and 30% reinvestment into female-led community initiatives, permanently. Chijioke nodded. It's yours. All of it. She didn't smile. And I choose the team. Even if they're the ones who call for your removal. Especially if they are. Let them work under what they try to bury. The media caught wind before the ink dried. Rumors spiraled. Was she truly returning again? Was it revenge? Was it power? But Amaka said nothing. Her return would not be announced in press releases. It would be revealed in presence. The new Adeyemi Women's Initiative launched with a public town hall, held not in the tower, but in the open courtyard of a school on the city's edge. There were no velvet ropes, no filtered lights, only white chairs, brown dust, paper programs, and hope. Chijioke stood quietly in the background, not as host, not as power, just presence. When Amaka stepped to the podium, the crowd hushed, not out of fear, out of reverence. She looked over the audience, executives in suits, village girls in sandals, press in polished shoes, and began. I was once told I didn't belong here, she said, her voice steady, that I was too small for the halls of power, that I should serve in silence and disappear with grace. She paused, letting silence become scripture. I did disappear, but not with shame, with strategy. I went where the soil remembered my name. The audience leaned in. I returned not to reclaim a seat, but to rebuild a system. One where the next girl wearing name tag does not have to hide her dreams inside her apron pocket. People began to nod. Some wept quietly. Even the press stopped scribbling. Yes, I was a maid. Yes, they stripped my badge. Yes, they cast me out. But I did not come back to be thanked. I came back to open the door wider, for those still knocking. Applause began softly, then thundered. Flashbulbs lit the air. But for once, The light did not blind. It revealed. The media didn't call her a phoenix. They called her the woman who healed what pride destroyed. After the ceremony, guests gathered in clusters, some to network, others to breathe. But Chijioke waited, not with a statement, with a question. He approached her near the neem tree planted as part of the initiative, its young leaves already reaching for sun. "You didn't have to forgive me," he said. "I didn't," she replied gently. "I forgave myself. You just stopped mattering enough to hate." He exhaled. A release, not a retreat. "But I'm here now," he added, voice almost trembling. "Not just to work with you, but to walk beside you." Amaka tilted her head, unreadable. "I'm offering more than partnership," Chijioke said, stepping closer. "I'm offering my heart, if you'll have it." Her eyes searched his, not for lies, but for transformation. And then, softly, she replied, "Let's rebuild that too." But slowly. They tried to erase her name. Now it stands beside theirs in gold. The nameplate shimmered beneath the sunlight. The Okoro Women's Legacy Foundation. Etched in gold, bold and unflinching. It was mounted on the tallest wall of the newly launched headquarters. Behind it stood a garden fed by recycled rainwater. And within it stood rooms of innovation, classrooms of strategy, clinics of healing, and offices that welcomed the unheard. This was no vanity project. It was a revolution in bricks and breath. Amaka didn't cut the ribbon with cameras flashing. A girl from the Foundation's first rural mentorship cohort did. Her name was Blessing, a girl once afraid to speak aloud, now delivering a speech before national dignitaries and foreign investors. As she said, "I found my voice because someone refused to forget hers." Amaka turned away slightly, letting the tears fall where the cameras wouldn't catch. Within a year, over 2,000 women across Nigeria had passed through the Foundation's programs, grants, leadership incubators, trauma recovery, entrepreneurship boot camps. Every document carried a watermark. Your name is not the tag they gave you. Chijioke watched it all unfold, not with guilt, but with awe. Where once he had ruled with detachment, now he served with intentionality. The board had changed. So had he. The building that once housed arrogance now displayed humility in its halls. In a dramatic gesture, Chijioke renamed the company's legacy project, the Amaka Initiative for Ethical Enterprise. The press release was not flowery. It was factual. It detailed her contributions, her endurance, her return, and her refusal to fold. Her name, once whispered in shame, now echoed in praise. He handed her the pen at the press conference. She signed the renaming document in silence, then looked up, voice calm. "You don't honor me by adding my name. You honor me by changing your ways." The audience applauded, but it was the former staff, janitors, caterers, assistants who clapped the loudest. Perhaps the greatest symbol of her rise, however, stood quietly off a quiet street in Ikoyi, the Adeyemi mansion. Once, it had stripped her of name and dignity. Now, it stood as the house of her story, a converted leadership museum dedicated to women who rose from nothing. One room held her old uniform, framed. Another displayed letters from girls across Africa who found courage in her journey. A hallway bore a quote she had once scribbled in her notebook. "Dignity is not what you're given. It's what you protect when everything's taken." The day the exhibit opened, Amaka stood alone in the room where the wine had spilled, where her badge had been torn. Now, the floor beneath was etched with a message. From here, she rose. Chijioke stood at the entrance, not interfering. She saw him. He nodded. She walked past without a word. Forgiveness had been given, but some wounds stayed visible, so they could teach others not to cut so carelessly. And then, with no fanfare, she disappeared again, not into silence, but into purpose. Weeks later, villagers in her hometown awoke to trucks arriving with books, desks, solar panels. A new building rose beside the neem tree. The sign read, Okoro School of Transformational Leadership. She returned wearing no badge, no blazer, just a wrapper and a voice. The mango trees bent in the wind like they were bowing. Children gathered with wide eyes. And in that classroom, where it all began, she stood once more, chalk in hand. This time, she wouldn't just teach names. They would learn how to make their names unforgettable. Every name carries a story, and some survive fire. She used to whisper her name. Now, it echoes across nations. The Okoro School of Transformational Leadership sits beneath the shade of a neem tree, its courtyard alive with voices that once trembled. The village that once pitted her now protects her legacy. Inside the classroom, a young girl named Ifeoma stands at the blackboard, writing her name in bold letters, her voice strong. I am not afraid to be seen. Amaka watches from the doorway, arms folded gently, face soft. There's no audience, no cameras, just the quiet satisfaction of cycles broken. In Lagos, the Amaka initiative continues to thrive. Women now sit on boards that once shut their doors. Street vendors turned entrepreneurs tell their stories in international conferences. Her foundation's ripple has become a wave. Global publications call her Africa's architect of redemption. But she does not wear the titles. She still writes in the same notebook. She still walks the red earth barefoot when it rains. Because she remembers, the rain doesn't just wash shame, it waters legacy. A journalist once asked her, "What would you tell the girl you used to be?" She had smiled, eyes distant. "I would tell her, let them call you names, but never let them define you." The camera had gone quiet, and in that silence, the world listened. Back in Lagos, the Adeyemi mansion, now the house of her story, hosts an annual exhibition titled Rise from Ruin. Visitors pause in front of the marble plaque, just beneath the chandelier where her shame once bled into red wine. The engraving reads, "They tore off her badge. Now her name is carved in stone." Chijioke visits every year. Never as CEO, always as witness. He tells students, sometimes redemption wears the face of the one you shamed. And in the final visual, we see it. Her name, Amaka Okoro, etched in marble, backlit by golden light. Not erased, not hidden, but eternal. There are names we forget. There are names we fear. But some names, we remember, because they taught us what rising sounds like. The greatest power is not to rise. It is to rise without vengeance. And sometimes, the one you silence is the one holding your rescue. Have you ever judged someone too quickly? Shame someone who was planning your rescue. Share your moment of realization in the comments. Like if her journey broke something open in you. Comment if you've ever worn a name that wasn't yours. Subscribe to hear the stories of the unheard. Because sometimes, the quiet ones carry the loudest truth.